Right. Hello, and I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us here this evening for this evening's Monday at the Mess talk. And our talk this evening is Weaving in the Liberties. Mondays at the Mess is a series of talks run by Richmond Barracks and Inchicore that celebrate the rich stories and experiences of the local community, both past and present. Richmond Barracks is run by Dublin City Cultural Club, which runs cultural initiatives and buildings across the city with and for the local people of Dublin. My name is Pat Gary. And in a few moments, I'm going to hand you over to tonight's speaker, Cathy Scuffil. But before we start, I want to let you know there will be time at the end for a number of questions. This talk has been recorded and will be shared with us shared with you at a later date on one of our channels. And for any information on this and other activities, I'll put the link up at the for our newsletter at the end of in the chat box. Our speaker today is Cathy Scuffil. Cathy is Dublin City Council Historian Residence for Dublin South Central and Dublin South East areas. Born and raised in Dublin, Cathy's interest in local history was formed at an early age, encouraged by her parents, who also shared a love of Dublin. Her master's thesis research was published by the Four Courts Press as The South Circle Road, Dublin on the eve of the First World War, and an abridged version awarded the Silver Medal by the Old Dublin Society in 2018. Cathy was actively involved in a wide range of community events during the 1916 centenary commemorations and also works as a consultant historian. So without further delay, I'm going to hand you over to Cathy. Cathy.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Pat. And I'd like to say a special thank you to Pat and to Kate Chandler for making all the arrangements for tonight. These things don't just happen, they have to be caused to happen. I'm very aware of it. I'm also very conscious that we have a bit of a heat wave on at the minute. And so thank you all very much for joining us. I hope you enjoy tonight's talk. Weaving in the Liberties. Why would we even consider weaving in the Liberties? Why would we consider even bringing weaving back to the Liberties? Well, I hope I make an argument for it for you tonight, and that you might see how things can evolve when you put your mind to it. So let's have a look at weaving in the Liberties, and let's go back in time a bit to see, can we make a good argument for it to happen? And where better to start than with all the archaeological digs that have been taking place in and around the Liberties areas. Now, this is one of my favourite pictures because if you look really carefully at it, you can see they didn't have to go down too far to start hitting archaeology. This was the former Aircom car park in Mill Street in Dublin. And who would have thought about 3 or 4 feet under the layer of the car park, here was lying a very interesting pathway and all of these pits. And in these pits, they found evidence of tanning, bookmaking, and some weaving implements. So it just goes to show that right under our feet in the Liberties, our history is there to be found and waiting to be found. And as the developments are taking place, things are slowly giving themselves up. Now, to give you an example of some of the things that are being found, here's a little list that museum.ie have made available. And these refer to an archaeological site that was being cleared near John's Lane Church in the Liberties, just off Thomas Street there. And look at the items that they found. They found pieces of silk cut to fit for different sizes, a highly luxurious item. They found complete pieces of wool and an entire width of cloth, 4 possible finds of another piece of silk, more wool, an awful lot of half-finished caps, and these caps all relate, believe it or not, to the Viking era, the Hiberno-Norse time in Dublin. The items that they found were things like weavers and spinners' equipment, like carding combs, spindles, spindle whorls, loom weights, weaver swords, and I don't mean they were fighting with each other. These were items that they used for actually cutting cloth. There were various tablets, cloth smoothers. Now, today, I suppose we think they might be irons, but these were actually large, smooth stones that were used to smooth out cloth, as well as various pieces of yarn, thread, textiles, and shears that they suspect may have been used for cutting the textiles. all found in just one small part of the Liberties, left behind by the very early weavers, our Viking weavers, our Hiberno-Norse weavers. They left a few other things behind as well. If we start considering some of the place names, now here's one in the Black Pits area of Dublin. Why this is significant is this is part of the parish of St. Nicholas of Myra in Francis Street. The parish of St. Nicholas of Myra had links with the Isle of Man. In fact, it was the parish church for the Isle of Man for quite a number of years. And some of the records in the church reflect that. And one other thing reflects it. If you're lucky enough to get into the church, have a look at the beautiful ornate ceiling and see, can you find the legs of man hidden in one of the panels? The clue is it's the one over the gallery, the choir gallery. Why I mention that parish and the links with the Isle of Man is this particular place name. It's located between Malpa Street and Fumbley Lane, and it's known to the locals as the Gluey. When I was a child, I played in the Gluey. When we'd be down in the grandparents, we'd be sent up to play in the Gluey. It was a safe little laneway, Malpa's place, between Malpa Street and Fumbley Lane. No cars, no traffic, small little area linking the two streets, not too far away from where my grandparents were. When I started researching what the Gluey might mean, I realized there was a significance in both words. The is actually from the Manx word th, which means house, like the Irish word tig, house. And Gluey was actually a weaver. So a weaver's house or a weaver's shed is actually the name, the Gluey. Who'd have thought we were talking about Viking weavers when we were using that phrase as children, when we said we were going up to play in the Gluey. Now, the real link with weaving in the Liberties all hinges on this one Act of Parliament from 1662. And this is the heavy history, which we'll run through and get a good feel for the time that we're speaking about. That Act of Parliament encouraged inward immigration from places like the west of England, Anglia, that part of England itself, and continental Europe. It was to bolster the Protestant population in Ireland. And most of them that came over were either weavers themselves or had connections with weaving industry. They were supporting it in some way. This was all encouraged by the Duke of Ormond. He established a number of agricultural-based industries. The Earl of Meath, as we know, he had plenty of land in and around the Liberties area, having received it from King Henry VIII a few years earlier with the dissolution of the monasteries, particularly the Abbey of St. Thomas. The second Earl of Meath created Newmarket in 1674, quite quickly after the Act of Parliament was passed. And the Newmarket was to deal in wool, hides, flax, to service these growing industries in the Liberties area. Consequently, areas like the Coombe and Weaver Square became absolutely associated with the weaving industry. In fact, the early name for Weaver Square was Cloth Square. I prefer the new one, Weaver Square will do. The Tenter Fields were near Weaver Square, and it was here that the cloth and the skins were stretched out on wooden frames to dry and to cure. The whole area became synonymous with textile production all through the 18th century. Initially, it was woolen trade, but then it expanded into linen, cotton, silk, and the famous Dublin poplin. From the 19th century on, it underwent a gradual decline, but it was to be a terminal decline in many ways. So that's the basic history of the weaving. Here's the original plans for Newmarket by the Earl of Meath, a bit grainy, a bit difficult to see, but you'll just about make out Mill Street in the bottom of the screen there. And where I have the yellow circle with the arrow, they're the plans for Newmarket as held by the Earl of Meath's family out in Kilruddery. And here's the Newmarket we know today. As you can see, this is Roke's map from 1756, but the layout of Newmarket has hardly changed. The one thing I will say is, if you look at it a little closer, just widen out that oval there, the little bump in Newmarket, that was the part of the market that the Earl of Meath kept for himself. That was the Earl of Meath market. And you might remember the Red Line pub was located there. You know, that part of Newmarket that just seems to recess in a little bit. The other significant thing, of course, is the watch house right in the middle of Newmarket. When you have all this expensive material or hides lying around waiting for the market to take place, of course you're going to need security. So they called it a watch house. Today it'd be the little porter cabin at the main entrance where we'd have the security man. But you can see the whole area was being geared up for market, for dealing in hides and dealing in the finished product that would be woven in the area. And of course, these people left behind many, many place names. Not only have we got the gluey from the early time of the Hiberno Norse, but we've got these beautiful ones like Marrowbone Lane. Marrowbone Lane, believe it or not, is how Dubliners speak French, because it shouldn't be Marrowbone Lane, but it should be Marylebone Lane, from the French Huguenot speakers who lived in the area. I like to see that Dublin City Council actually got it right in the Irish there. Lana Wirawa, Marylebone Lane, but Dublinese gave us Marrowbone Lane, and Marrowbone Lane has stuck ever since. This beautiful one as well, Cow Parlour. Cow parlour actually comes from a French word, coupe perlée, meaning the hem cutters. Not only were they weavers, we had people who made the looms, we had people who did the finished products, we had all of the support industries working in the area, supporting the weavers. So the hem cutters, the coupe perlée, well, that became Cow Parlour, and Cow Parlour it is. A little laneway linking Weaver Square to the Tenters area. And of course, we've the obvious ones like Weaver Close, Weaver Square, Weaver Street. They're all connected again to the weaving industry. This is a great image actually of Cow Parlour. And you can still actually walk or cycle, as this gentleman is doing, up around the back laneway to bring you into Brown Street. This is the back of the old houses that would have been located in Brown Street. And these houses are still there today in Cow Parlour. But what about those lovely alleys off Meath Street? Well, here's three. Many of you will know Crossstick Alley, but did you ever really think about the name? Cross sticks are actually weaving implements. And Crossstick Alley reflects the weaving industry from the early times when they were trading in textiles all around the Meath Street area. Nearby, we have Flag Alley. Now, it's under reconstruction. This is the ad, actually, for the new apartments that are being built there. But Flag Alley reflects the fact that they made the buntings and flags and the banners for many of the guilds, and they would have been made in and around the Meath Street area and probably traded in and around the Meath Street area. And the other one, the picture that I have here, is one of my favourites. This is Engine Alley. Now, it has given its name to a rock band, but Engine Alley is another one of those lovely little Dublinese things that has crept from something else. Originally, this was Indian Alley. Indian Alley was commemorating the fact that the silks and the cottons from India were traded here. And when you think of it, we still have that market trading going on in the Meath Street area, very, very near Engine Alley. Indian Alley quickly became Engine Alley, and Engine Alley became Engine Alley, and Engine Alley it remains today. So even the little alleys off Meath Street have a story to tell. Back to Roke's map, and I'm just bringing you back up now towards the Weaver Square area. And you can see the first thing I'd just like to highlight is, of course, Weaver Square and the nearby road that links you into Cork Street called Ormond Street, after the Duke of Ormond, the man who brought these people to live in the area. Chambers Street, that commemorates one of the Earl of Meath's family, Chambray being a son-in-law who married into the family, and even Brown Street, which is also on our map there, just coming off screen below Weaver Square. That again is another connection with the Earl of Meath's family. So he's linked up to the whole thing. But have you ever noticed this on Roke's map? This area in what we now know as the Tenters, but you can see this pattern of posts running right through the whole map. You can also see that there are cisterns and a water supply. These are tributaries of the Poddle, or water courses taken off the Poddle. But look at these cisterns at work, something going on in this general area. But these posts are very, very curious. And this is what they would have looked like. These are the original tenter posts put there to dry the cloth after the weaving process, after the bleaching process, after the washing process, which had taken place in those cisterns, and then you dry it out. The cloths are huge. These are cloths made for the tents, for the army campaigns across Europe, part of the empire and the battles that took place with France all across Europe. These tents would have been erected on the battlefields, woven in the Liberties of Dublin. The other thing that was being made were sails for sailing ships. So this is weaving on an industrial scale, and they are the tent posts that were put there to dry out the cloth. I know it's the wrong thing to say when we're in the middle of a heat wave, but it does rain in Dublin. So if you are depending on posts in the tenters to dry out your cloth, you're going to run into trouble, especially in a very wet summer. This is why we built the stove tenter house. And the stove tenter house did exactly what it was called. It had stoves located in the basement area, and the cloths were put inside, hung over racks or wooden poles that ran right through the building. In fact, it was the biggest airing cupboard in Ireland, designed to dry out the tenters, cloths and the weaving items that had been drying in the fields when we had bad weather. This was the saviour of the weaving industry in Dublin. I have another image of it, and this is in an unusual location. Just inside the gate of Glasnevin Cemetery, seek out the grave of Father John Spratt in the O'Connell Circle. And when you find his grave, engraved on the side of it is an image of the Stove Tenter House in Cork Street, when it later became St. Joseph's Night Refuge, when he was serving the community in the general area. He was a Cork Street man himself, and he turned the now redundant Stove Tenter House into a place of refuge for the people of the area. And this is a fantastic image of it on his grave. Another item that's on his gravestone is Whitefriars Street Church in its original form, because he's also the man who brought the bones of Valentine to Dublin. You find connections with the French language all around the area. This is a map showing Blackpit's buildings. You can see Greenville Parade there, John Street, Hamel Street, Michael's Terrace, all of those little houses that are located there just behind Warrenmount School. But the real name of that estate is the Belleville Estate, a link back to our French speakers. Another one of those names known to the locals, and you find these names cropping up. There's an image actually of what Blackpit's would have looked like. Parts of these houses are still in situ and have been actually repurposed. These two in particular are still there. This one is gone, but it's a typical Dutch Billy style house. And that was an actual housing style that was in the area. Some of them would have had a small window up here in the apex where a crane could be put out to bring in the raw materials. These were like mini factories. The raw materials would be hauled in through the attic door and then slowly make their way through the building as the wool was being carded by the children probably of the house in the next rooms, and then spun by the women of the house, and then woven into a finished product and then out the door or sold in the shop at the ground floor. There were mini factories, self-contained units, and the whole family would have been involved in actually weaving and making the goods for the larger groups that would have gathered them together for sale in places like Newmarket. Another little place name which I particularly like is this one up at the Grand Canal Harbour area for redevelopment. This is off James Street, but here we have a lovely little place name hidden down below, Bell Bank. It was part of the development of the canal, and again picking up on the Irish or the French names that were in the area. And of course the other one we have is Bellevue, and you can see there an ad for the Bellevue maltings, which again were quite near to the Guinness Brewery, but again they're French names that are in the Liberties areas and are still used today. Sadly, Bell Bank has fallen out, but you do find it in the census records of 1901 and 1911. This is an image of the Irish Parliament, 1801, and we have the Act of Union. And this is where the beginning of the decline of the weaving industry in the Liberties area starts. All of these people, the peers of the realm, the high-class politicians, the lawmakers, the judges, and their fashionable families, all of them located up in the gallery there, are now going to live in London. The fashionable industry that Dublin had sustained, suddenly the people who are actually buying of that industry are now leaving. And it's a slow decline, but this is the beginning of the decline. The Act of Union, when we lost that layer of society, when they moved back to London, and then subsequent generations acted as absentee landlords, had no business in Ireland. They had their estates here, but they weren't coming over to them. And if they came over, it was more a holiday than actually living here. So if you're looking at them all there, the ladies in their finery, that would have all been woven in and around the Liberties area. And suddenly they're now in London. This change in the weaving industry has its consequences. And one of the consequences is that the Liberties boys, these are young apprentices who would have been automatically given weaving industry. They would have been, basically, their lives would have been planned ahead of them, are now suddenly not guaranteed a future. So we get constant newspaper reports of them picking fights with the lads they didn't like, who were the Roman Catholic butchers over in the Ormond area of Dublin, the north side. So you have the Liberties boys on the south side fighting with the Ormond butchers on the north side. And naturally, their flashpoints were going to be the Dublin bridges. So they would meet up at the bridges and then something would kick off. But they also picked fights in places like Oxman Town Green and out in Kilmainham. They turned up in Donnybrook a few times and even as far out as Palmerstown. They were guarding their home turf. It came from boredom. It came from the fact that we hadn't got a planned future for these young men anymore. And then they're finding other ways of blaming each other for their downfall. Most of the fights would be things like stone throwing or hitting one another with a stick. But sometimes they worked together. And we had a very memorable lynching of Constable Paul Farrell in Weaver's Square. He obviously was trying to calm things down. He managed to kick it off a little bit further. And it's a huge account in the newspapers. And of course, it's all linked to the decline in the textile trade from the end of the 18th century onwards. The apprenticeships fall out. We have a general depression in the whole industry. There are other clues to weaving, and this is an unusual one. We have garden escapes. And when they did the report on the Church of St. Nicholas Without and St. Luke's on the Coombe, one of the things they discovered in the graveyard was this little plant growing wild. This is soapworth. Soapworth was actually grown by the Huguenots to provide them with a soap product to wash their cloths. And that little plant is still growing wild in the area. And I believe Urban Plant Life actually had it in stock at some stage this year. Urban Plant Life, our inner city garden provider. And it's just nice to think that link is still continuing. So one of the things that was found in the graveyard growing wild was this little plant called soapworth, a garden escape, a link right back to our Huguenot weavers. The real decline in it, of course, were the various acts that were passed in the British Parliament, because the Irish weaving industry was hugely successful. And the very first act that was passed was in 1699 to prevent Irish wool exports. The parish that I mentioned, with the parish of St. Nicholas Without and St. Luke's, had a population mainly of silk, cotton, and poplin weavers. They kept reinventing the weaving industry and finding ways of doing it better, because every time there was an obstacle put in their way, they found a new way of working. However, they're constantly fighting. They're fighting against the fact that even the Parliament had left the city. So there is huge unemployment. There had been wealth generation from weaving up to about 1801, but then after that, the unemployment starts to kick in. And the weaving trade basically in the area did collapse. And of course, from that, then the economy slumped. I found a quote from the Earl of Kildare speaking in the British Parliament in 1829. And he said, and this is a very loaded statement when you think about it, 20,000 looms were silent in the city of Dublin. That statement alone gives you the image of how the weaving trade suddenly came to a halt about 30 years after the Act of Union. The other report then that I did find was that the annual charity sermon being held in St. Luke's Church, and they declared themselves as the poorest parish in Dublin. So had gone from being one of the wealthiest parishes to actually the poorest, all because of the collapse of the weaving trade. The image we have there is actually of the old Weavers' Hall that was located on the Coombe. And there you can see King George and the statue of King George. He was holding implements of weaving above the door of the old Weavers' Hall. Demolished, I remember it as a vacant site when I was a child. It has since been rebuilt as apartments. You would be roughly located where the new St. Luke's Avenue pulls out onto Dean Street at the bottom of the Coombe. Here's an image actually of Weavers Square, and anybody who knows that area may know those three smaller houses there. They're still there. But beside it, you can see there was a Dutch Billy and other houses that would have been associated with weaving. The Dutch Billies have these very, very unusual gables in them. And I did a check then for the late 1800s just to see what was going on in Weavers Square, just as a sample. And here we still have evidence of weaving and weaving associate industry. For example, James Beckett is there, number one, and he's a silk mercer. Richard Eustace is a public woolen dyer and manufacturer. Later, Eustaces were to move into again, roughly where Urban Plant Life is located. But look at the other houses. They have fallen into tenements, multi-occupancy homes. And of course, it fits in with the fact that we're now after the famine. And this brought so many people into the Dublin area, and all of these empty houses were taken up then to deal with the influx of people in and around the area. But there's still evidence of weaving in the Liberties, even at that point. Here's another little piece of weaving in the Liberties hiding in plain sight. And thanks to Google Maps for this particular image. You can see this is the corner of Weavers Square. So anybody who knows the area, this is the old, these are apartments built backing onto the old convent. This is Brown Street. There's Brookie Veen, the trees of Brookie Veen off in the distance. And this is the corner of Street and Weavers Square. There's this rather curious wall with these alcoves in it. You don't put something like that in front of me without me asking just what might be there. So I went digging, and in one of the old directories, I found this. 1913, it's declared as their new premises. the Irish Curled Hair Company. They made the bedding and mattress stuffing. This is part of weaving. The upholstery industry in the area was another reinvention of weaving in the area. So again, if I just go back to my previous slide, remember those windows? You can see them there on the ad. There's the windows, perfectly seen, and the Irish Curled Hair Company and their office is located there in Brown Street. Now, earlier on, I showed you the image of the stove tenter house, and some of you were probably saying, I wonder, is there any evidence of it still there? Well, now I just brought you over the wall of where the Irish Curled Hair Company was. And we're now in the grounds of the former convent of Weaver Square. In fact, you can see the convent building there in the background, the red brick one in the background behind the tree. But if you look to the left, these repurposed apartments here, part of the Sophia housing complex in Cork Street, and look carefully at the wall, you see the circle, the roundel in the wall. That's the remains of the beams that were put in the stove tenter house to dry the cloth. And that building you're looking at, the repurposed apartments, is actually the stove tenter house today. So it's lovely to think the building has been reused to house local people. And this building is a great example of the way an old building can be turned into something really positive. But the clue are those edges of the building there, the roundels along the side, which were the beams going through the original stove tenter house. And below ground would have been where the stoves themselves were. They've actually hired the ground in the convent area. Another one that I found was the tie making company, Fry's. I did a check on the census, in fact, for the area, and I found that nearly every woman in the 1911 census living in the RD Street area was a tie maker. And they really show here in their ad, and this is an ad from around 1911, showing how proud they are of what they're producing. And the image on your right is, that's a bow tie. That's what a bow tie looks like. Certain skill in making it. All the sewing has to be done in the reverse, and then they have to be turned to make them the real thing. And you can see here they're moving with the times too. The car has arrived. So we are specializing in ladies and gents, motor scarves, mufflers, etc. Irish poplin manufacturers of Dublin, Fry and Company of Cork Street. Again, reinventing the actual weaving industry as much as they possibly could and being very proud of what they were doing. I had a look at the 1911 census just out of curiosity for the Ushers and Merchants Quay area to see how many people declared themselves as weavers. Here's a sample. I found 441 people in those two electoral divisions declaring themselves as some way connected with weaving. And you can see there, there's silk, poplin, worsted, there's even wire weavers. And you can see the range of addresses. Some of them are up around the Dolphins Barn area, more of them are around Cork Street, just off Cork Street, Francis Street, John's Terrace, and even in the Tenter Lane of these. You could go forever. I couldn't put all 400 of them up, but you get the general idea. There was still a significant population of weavers, but most of them would have been casual labourers or working piecemeal. It would be nothing like what it was before the Act of Union, but there's still good evidence of weaving in the area at the time. In fact, when we pull up the contemporary map, and this is a map with Cork Street at the centre, so I'm bringing you between Brown Street and Dolphins Barn, and even in that small area, I can find 3 large companies associated with weaving. One of them is Elliott's of Brown Street, and they would be right behind Cow Parlour, so they're up at the top there. Then you have the Rehoboth factory of Bailey and Gibson on the South Circular Road. They're tent and marquee manufacturers. So that's a link right back to the really heavy industrialised days that we spoke about earlier. And you can see even on the map, the Tenters fields are shown there just off the map, but you can just about make it out. The last company is this one off Cork Street at Emerald Square, and it is the City Woolen Mills. And the City Woolen Mills is located just off Cork Street. And here's an ad for it. And what I really, really love about this ad is that one little point there, Rialto Surges. I suppose I'm biased because, well, I grew up in Rialto, but you can see how proud they too are of the fact that they are producing costume cloth, gentlemen's suitings, and the famous Rialto Surges. Again, reinventing the industry, and this is bringing us through the 20th century. We weren't going to get away with this talk without bringing a little revolution into it. This is an image of Michael Mallon. Michael Mallon, as most of you will know, was executed for his part in the 1916 Rising. But Michael Mallon was responsible for actually creating the hall in Donore Avenue called the Silk Weavers' Hall. And it was that hall that the Cumann women met in on the day of the Rising. Michael Mallon himself was a silk weaver. So he worked for the famous Atkinson, who had their place in their main trading place was actually Merchants Arch near the Halfpenny Bridge, but they had their weave industry all in and around the Liberties area. So Michael Mallon, one of the 1916 people, and Michael Mallon is connected directly with weaving in the Liberties. And of course, in later years, we had the famous sewing factories. So many people in the area had connections with places like Jack Toohey's, Glen Abbey. Everyone remember Glen Abbey near Pashas Cathedral. Henry White's, the sign is still up there on the wall. I mean, famous for fashion in Grafton Street. And of course, Blair Fancy Linens. I have a very bad photograph of it there, but they were located not too far from the Gluey of all places. Again, all linked backs to the weaving industry, but as it went into a decline, we just had it as sewing factories, but still a big link with the textile industries. And many people will tell you stories of working in these large concerns and what a fantastic camaraderie there was among the people who worked there. There are a few more, but that's just to give you a sample of some of the bigger names that were located in the area. So if I was to say to you, 2021, have we weavers in Dublin 8? Have we weavers in the Liberties? And have I made a sufficient argument that would support bringing weaving back to the area? Well, did you expect me to put up an image now of the interior of a plane? This is an Aer Lingus plane, bedecked in lovely upholstery, carpets, and in other images you might get the curtain. You can see just a piece of a curtain there, all done in this beautiful color. Believe it or not, that's an example of weaving in the Liberties even today. It goes back to the botany weavers in Cork Street. In fact, the botany weavers occupied the premises that were formerly the City Woolen Mills, and the City Woolen Mills ad was used in promoting the talk tonight. They provide factories for the new business fabrics for the new business class cabin for Aer Lingus, and designed and produced all the seat covers, the carpets, and the curtains. And their quote is, "All beautifully designed in vibrant fibres to reflect the Irish weaving heritage." The only change I would make to that is I would change the word Irish to the Liberties, but you know, we all have our day. They've also done weaving for things like the Stena Line and the Lewis and a few other of the larger bus companies and EasyJet. So you could have a little piece of Cork Street flying over your head now that we're back flying after the lockdown. And even Dublin City Council has been looking at Newmarket, which we started the talk with, the early plans for Newmarket. They have plans for Newmarket too. And maybe when all the redevelopment of the area has taken place, this is what it could be recreated as. And the one thing I do like is they are retaining the square that was formerly the Earl of Meath's Market there, just located where the Red Line was. So that little indent in the Newmarket we'll see there. And you know, Although it is actually an ESB substation, the image of another building in the centre of Newmarket recreates the idea that at one time there was a watch house in the middle of Newmarket itself. The other thing, and you just got a sneak preview of it there, is the new park in Weaver Square. But little do the children know when they walk through the stylized gates into the park, they're actually walking into a modern interpretation of a weaving loom. So you can't look at those gates or that entranceway anymore without realizing that you're actually commemorating weaving in the Liberties. The gates were designed a particular way to reflect the workings of a loom. And I think that's particularly clever, particularly nice. And it's something to point out when you're in that part of Dublin. And this was my effort at bringing weaving back to the Liberties. And along with Maria Almsquist, we ran a number of taster sessions to see if people would have any interest in trying weaving, trying out the craft, and see if we could bring the heritage craft back with all of that history behind it. I said I would look at the history end of it and bolster it in any way we could. Maria took on the idea of actually promoting how to learn to weave. We ran 4 taster sessions and we were completely bowled over by the interest that we got. And here's the first weavers, the new weavers for weaving in the Liberties. This is one of their early days, one of their first days meeting, and they met to discuss how they would plan their classes. These classes are being run in conjunction with the City of Dublin Education and Training Board, and the enthusiasm of the group and the mix of the group has been absolutely amazing. Here they are, weaving. We were confined with space. It's very difficult to get community space in the Liberties, so they opted for trying out silk weaving, very ambitious way to start. And this is them working in the confined space using small implements that were working off a hook on the wall put there by the Sullis Project and using their body weight to taut the actual threads. And here they are learning how to do the principles of weaving and taking it step by step. The interest in the group is unbelievable. Even through the lockdown, they kept together with their WhatsApp group and kept their classes going. When we got past the first term, we then opened up the second term with 2 classes. I'm delighted to say there are plans now to have 3 come next September. Interest has been absolutely huge and has never waned throughout the whole process, which Maria brought them through step by step with different themes. This was their first showcase, took place down in the Hyatt Hotel, down in one of the new developments in the area. And they actually took the opportunity to showcase the small items that they had woven using the theme colours of the Liberties, because we asked them to look at their environment and to interpret it in any way that they could. And they came up with so many different ways of doing that. And when I say look at your environment, you probably didn't expect me to put up a Dubs flag and the image of a bus lane or a bicycle lane with double yellow lines in it. But this is what I mean by people actually looking at their environment and trying to interpret. Look what Eric did, because we had the famous 5 in a row win for the Dubs, and he wove 5 blue and blue ribbons and framed them. And he wore his Dub shirt just to make sure we got the message. And of course, the interpretation of the cycle lane and the double yellow lines is here in the other woven piece that was put on display. So getting people to look at their area and see, could they turn it into something creative? This is the type of thing that's being woven in the Liberties. And it doesn't stop there. Here's Claire wearing her sash, which she wove herself, the Liberties Rose. And these are some of the key rings that they are producing. The colours are significant. The black for the industrial buildings of the area, the purple for the spirit of the people of the Liberties itself. Just end on their logo. Even their logo has a story to tell. The Liberties Weavers present to you this 3 colours red, yellow, and blue. And they bring us back to the beginning of our story. I mentioned the Abbey of St. Thomas in passing, which formed the Liberties of Dublin, which later became the Earl of Meath's Liberty. There's three things to remember about that abbey. One is it commemorates St. Thomas a Becket, killed on the steps of Canterbury Cathedral. The blood of the martyr is the red colour in the logo. The fact that it was self-sustaining, the yellow, the honey, the wheat, it actually could look after itself. The Liberties has always been independent, has always cared for itself. This is the image of that spirit of self-sustaining. And the final is the blue of the River Poddle, the river that flows through its many watercourses and mill races, all through the Liberties area. And some people say it flows through the veins of the locals. And who am I to argue with that? Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed that brief trip through weaving in the Liberties. And many thanks to all for bringing tonight to us.
Go into questions. Can I just say give a particular welcome to the Dublin Local History Group, sorry, is my video not starting there? Okay, the Dublin Local History Group, who are here in big numbers here today. So, what questions do we have? So amazing. There's a question here: has there been any sort of a commercial link up with the efforts being undertaken by your weavers and private enterprise?
It's a great question. It's a really good question, Pat. I suspect that would have happened, except for the fact that we had the lockdown. Nobody saw a pandemic coming, and nobody saw it lasting nearly 2 years. So, from that point of view, there has been, that has stalled things a little bit, but only a little bit. They are a very, very dynamic group, and I suspect you'll hear a lot more about them. And I know that they have plans to try and bring it a bit forward. But they are never losing sight of the fact that they have that historic connection to the area. So I think, yes, it will come, but just not yet.
And question here after the Act of Union, weaving in Dublin seemed to have died, but it seemed to have carried on in Belfast. Was there any particular reason why it would have carried on in Belfast? I know the centre of the linen production was up there, so.
Yeah, I think it was more the fact that it was the linen production. Also, you had a stronger Protestant community in the north of Ireland, so they had that kind of embedded industry already there. They grew their own flax in the north as well. Now I know there was a little bit of flax growing in the southern part of Ireland, but certainly in the north of Ireland they grew flax, and they certainly kept their linen industry going. It later became very popular to have Irish linen, and that would have been synonymous with that part of Ireland. But it had its moments too, and it had its difficulties. But the other weaving in Dublin City certainly was very affected by the fact that it's on the doorstep market was gone. The legal people, the politicians, the peers of the realm, they were all gone back to London.
And the question here now, serge, Rialto serge. What exactly is serge, Cathy?
Yeah, Rialto serge. I've actually seen it. It's great. If you cast your mind back to, those gabardines. Well, anybody who went to a girls' school would know all about the gabardines that we had to wear. It's that type of hard-wearing material. And my understanding is that Rialto serge was used for military uniforms. So it would have been a very hard-wearing material. And it was the one thing that the City Woolen Mills was very proud of producing. The ones I saw were navy. I saw a ream of it, and it had Rialto serge written on it. Great branding, really keeping it local there. And I have to say, a kind of proud moment when you see something like that.
Fantastic. Now, there's lots of comments here about the importance of storytelling, how well you've captured your audience attention. Absolutely, it's full of praise, Cathy. I wouldn't be able to get your head out the door to continue on with all the praise. Okay, but this There's a talk here. You know the Rouserstown woolen mills up there in Kilmainham woolen mills. There's a person here who wants to know: is there any questions or any attempt been made to uh, revitalise the weaving up there or do something with the premises?
Well, I know the mill has been saved in that it's going to be preserved as a building. It certainly was involved in the type of manufacture. The last people who were in it were doing exactly what the botany weavers are doing, which was producing hard wearing cloth for airlines and trains and, you know, buses, that type of thing. I don't know too much about what stage the preservation of the building is. I presume the main thing is make sure the roof is right and there's no more water getting in, all that type of thing. But for now, the building is safe. And of course, there will be plans to develop it, and it's the last actual working mill building on the Cammock, which is hugely significant for that part of Dublin. And it links in very nicely with the other tourism offerings that we have there, such as the Royal Hospital, Kilmainham Jail and Courthouse, and even the Memorial Gardens. It forms a fantastic area for tourism. And it would be another wonderful thing to offer as part of that. So again, it'll be a case of watch this space. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about the Kilmainham Mill in the years ahead.
And this is a question here about the Stove Tenter House. Between its when it ceased to be used for as a stone or the Stove Tenter House,
Yeah.
and it was then became St. Joseph Night Refuge.
Night
Was there
refuge.
much of a was it abandoned for a long time before use, or was it just?
It fell out of use because the weaving industry was in a decline. So there wasn't as much need for, using it, and it fell into decline. But Father John Spratt, being the man that he is, I mean, the person who brings the bones of Valentine to Dublin is somebody who's, to be reckoned with. So he saw it as a building that he could repurpose, and he turned it into St. Joseph's Night Refuge. And then later on, it has now been taken by Sophia Housing and completely refurbished into beautiful apartments. And one of the nice things is if you're in the upper floors of those apartments, you can still see the vaulted ceilings. Although they're modern homes, little features like a vaulted ceiling that goes right back to the original Stove Tenter House can still be seen in the flats themselves, which I particularly like because it's holding on to a piece of our heritage, and yet we're not immortalizing it by leaving it empty. We're actually making it useful, and yet it's still there to be shown. I like that.
Well, it shows you how well built it was actually to have
Yeah,
survived. I mean, as a working building, and then we'd convert it into apartments.
yeah.
It's a it's incredible thing. And actually, the guy wasn't a chap called Pleasance. He's
Thomas Pleasance. Yeah,
Thomas Pleasance who actually
yeah.
built it for the
That's
Weavers, and
right.
he's commemorated in Pleasant Street there off Camden Street.
Exactly.
Uh,
So yeah, we're
and there's
putting it all together now. You see that.
there's by the way, by Friar Street, if you go in on your left hand side, there's a lot of information there about Father Spratt.
Yes, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's worth
yeah.
thing. Um, Terrific research, especially on the street names. Um, Question here: the belief that England wouldn't buy Irish weavers' goods. You know, it was an act of Parliament, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right. Because it was damaging their own industry. And this is where, economics comes into play. The Irish weaving industry was hugely successful, but it was damaging the British industry. And as a result of that, then they started putting tariffs and obstacles and problems. So the Irish weavers, being from the Liberties, finding a way around a problem, they worked out that if you mixed your cloth, you mixed your threads, so they mixed up things like cotton and silk and wool to create things like poplin. You couldn't put a tax on that because it wasn't a pure wool product. And this is where the Dublin poplin became hugely popular. It became so popular, it was even in Queen Victoria's trousseau. So, they've kept constantly trying to reinvent it until they couldn't reinvent it anymore. Eventually it gives, because if you have so many obstacles and so many things to find a way around, something has to give way. So we were left with very, very little of it. I
Yeah.
hope we're bringing it back. I just hope we're starting a process of it coming back again, a heritage craft coming back to the Liberties of Dublin.
Well, hopefully, I mean, hopefully just some of the looms still around that people can actually use them. I remember a few years ago seeing one, a jacquard loom
Mm.
in the
Hmm.
Liberties, like, you know, and I'm sure somebody of note has it somewhere, like, you know, so I think all of the looms and the equipment's an awful lot still there,
Yeah,
you know, for
there are,
people.
you find them hiding, you know, they are there. There are things turning up. But it's more than that. I would love to see maybe someone take the opportunity to expand it even further. Would we have carpenters who might like to make a Liberties loom? Would we have carpenters who'd make shuttles? That type of thing are
Mm.
all trades that we had in the area too. And wouldn't it be wonderful to bring them all back as part of a package of heritage crafts coming back? I mean, we brought back whiskey, we brought back
Mm.
brewing. We should be bringing back the weaving, you know. Let's
Definitely.
balance it out now. You know, we're a creative lot. Why not? Why
Well,
not?
that's a task for somebody. Listen, Cathy, that's been absolutely wonderful. Again, I want to thank people from the Dublin Local History Group who've come in here in great numbers here today. Thank you all for attending here. And if you we've given the link in the chat box if you want to be aware of anything else that we're organising in the future. So again, for myself, Pat Gary, and for Cathy Scuffil, and hope to hear from you all again soon. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you very much. Bye bye. God bless.